Arts College, Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. He pursued his chartered accountancy during the year 93 to 96 under Shri K.S. Palanisamy, Chartered Accountant, Coimbatore. He cleared his CA Inter exam by obtaining 33rd rank all India basis and CA final by obtaining 43rd rank all India basis. He also he was a gold medalist at Coimbatore branch level in CA final. Presently, he is a partner in the KS Palanisamy and Company, Chartered Accountant, Coimbatore. Uh, Mr. Ramnath has 23 years experience in handling audit of various corporate and the non-corporate entities. He also handled the appeal under the Income Tax Act, ITAT. He also handled the corporate and the non-corporate restructuring cases. He was a faculty for the CA final direct taxation paper for Coimbatore branch for last 17 years. He presented paper in direct access in seminar and the conference organized by the various branch of the South India Regional Council of ICI. He also addressed the student of various college on the topic related to commerce and taxation. He is also member of the academic and the governing council of various education institutes at Coimbatore. He was a member of the editing team of the book authored by Padma Shri awardee Shri T.N. Manoharan for studies of income tax law. By this, I hand over this to Mr. Ramnath. Welcome, sir.
It's really a pleasure, sir. Thank you for your nice. The office bearers of the study circle, convener Mr. Amit Ji, and members in today's webinar, a very warm good evening to one and all. As rightly remarked at the beginning, this topic is an evergreen topic. Several years we have been conducting this attest function as expected by the central government. And we have been continuously updating ourselves year after year, but still this topic and that bank audit seminar happens to be an annual ritual, but every year we would like to update ourselves because in addition to whatever we learn, every year the changes are made by the revenue in the farm as well as by the legislature in the act, so also by the judiciary through case laws. Therefore, we need to necessarily update ourselves, and that's how this topic assumes a lot of importance. Every time it is taken up for discussion, class after class. So this time, very interestingly, our convener has asked me to present something called as FAQ on the tax audit. Some questions which have been raised over a period of time in my presentation in the last 1 year on tax audit. I have collated everything to the extent of the time available based on the classes and also the changes made in the last year and the Finance Act 2020. Based on that, I've taken up. Instead of going class after class, it is better to take the queries in the form of FAQ and try to address the nuances of law. So therefore, it is not only filling up the form that matters, it is also understanding the law. So also the case law associated with that law, and then trying to appreciate how to fill up the information in the return and in the columns of 3CD, and then furnishing to the income tax department. That's how this topic assumes significance. Therefore, it is thought fit to take up the queries, whatever has been coming to my mind because of my addressing this particular topic for the last season. This season itself, it is the 14th meeting I'm addressing on this, and whatever queries have come, I've assimilated all of them, and I've just put it in the presentation. We will try to discuss. After, say, for example, 45 minutes or so, we will take a break and take up questions relating to those topics. If at all something also running in the minds of the members, that also subject to the time availability from the organizer's point, we'll consider that and then take up the remaining slides, and whatever questions unravel, that also at the end of the session, subject to availability of time, we'll pick up. That's how I've decided to take up the queries available with reference to. But of course, as mentioned, it is not exhaustive because the topic is evergreen. Therefore, one would not be able to handle all the queries possible, all the queries one can contemplate in a screen. But to the best extent, whatever in day-to-day life we will come across, I have highlighted. And anything else left over also during the Q&A session, we'll take up for our discussion. Keeping this prelude in mind, we will get into the topic proper. Now, the first query is with reference to the amendment came in the Finance Act 2020 in section 44AB class A provision. Let us just try to take the facts of the case and then appreciate the law. Turnover during the financial year 1920 is 3 crore. The assessee satisfied both the conditions regarding cash receipt and payment. There, the assessee can file tax audit report. Under which clause? Similarly, turnover during the financial year 1920, 1.5 crore. It is not 3 crore. All transactions are by check. Income declared is less than 8 or 6%. Is it supposed to be liable for tax audit? It's another query came up from one of the participants in another meeting. To appreciate this, we need to understand the text which has come up in the Finance Act 2020, assessment year 2021 onwards. This particular proviso is applicable in law. Normally, any amendment coming in the Finance Act will be applicable from the next assessment year. If budget 2020 presented on 1st of February 2020 comes up with an amendment, it will be applicable from financial year 2021. Peculiarly, this assessment, this particular amendment is applicable from the financial year 1920. That means assessment year 2021 itself, this amendment is applicable. So this extended quantum or turnover criteria of 1 crore to 5 crore for not getting the accounts audited, applicable for the financial year 1920 and thereafter. That means for the year under audit which we are carrying out in this season, we can examine this applicability, and if at all the conditions are satisfied, audit is not warranted. What are the conditions? Aggregate of all amounts received, including amount received for sales, turnover, gross receipt, does not exceed 5% of the total amount or said amount. Aggregate of all payment made does not exceed 5% if expenditure in cash. Then the clause shall have effect as if for the words 1 crore, the words 5 crore substituted with effect from assessment year 2021. Now, class A, class B, class C, class D, class E, if one is satisfying it, then he has to get the accounts audited and furnish that report of an audit before the specified date. Is what the law says. It's a mandatory requirement. So, in case where the conditions are satisfied, then the assessee is not required to apply the provisions of 44AB at all. Is what the question before us. So now, less than 5 crore conditions are satisfied. Cash payment is also less than 5% of the total payment. Cash receipt is also less than 5%. In that case, obviously, class A below, proviso below class A applies. Therefore, in this case, assessee is not required to get the accounts audited. Now, the audit provision is not applicable to this case because it is falling between 1 to 5 crore. Now, let us take this scenario. Turnover during the financial year is 1.5 crore, everything by check. Income declared. So, income declaration issue would come under 44AD only. 44AB class A will not have that requirement of income. It only talks about turnover. Turnover exceeding 1 crore, generally audit is required. 1 crore to 5 crore rupees, if both are payments and receipts are only in check, then instead of 1 crore, we should consider that as 5 crore. Turnover criteria less than 5 crore, audit is not required, whether or not we are offering 8 or 6%. What happens if in the previous year the assessee has undergone 44 AD, something which will take up little later. So if receipt side, payment side, through check up to 5 crore turnover, audit not warranted. For availing the no tax audit up to 5 crore cash component, receipts and payment up to 5% to be calculated. For this, should capital contribution or drawing also to be considered, or only transaction with outsider to be considered? So this proviso says aggregate of all amount received, including amount received for sales, turnover, gross receipt, does not exceed 5% of the said amount. Similarly for payment. That means in this year, financial year 1920 and thereafter, in addition to preparing profit and loss account and balance sheet, we are required to prepare a receipt and payment account. Now, in a receipts and payment account, we will have to have total column, thereafter cash, then bank and non-cash transaction. We have columns for this. So now non-cash will have all journal entries, cash collections, cash payments, bank collections, bank payments, contra if any will offset. Then all will start with opening cash and bank balance, bifurcated into cash, bank. All collections bifurcated into cash, bank. All remittances bifurcated into cash and bank, and then total. Now, the total collection, cash collection as a percentage to total collection, less than 5%. Cash payment as a percentage to total payment, less than 5%. We are satisfying the condition of class A and class B of proviso below class A of 44AB. They are not required to get the accounts audited so long as the turnover does not exceed 5 crore. For the purpose of this cash flow, 5% of the total, your cash is less than that. 5% of the total payment, cash payment is less than that. For this purpose, in that line item, do we need to consider the cash received from the proprietor or cash withdrawn by the proprietor? Now, it talks about received, amount received, payment made. I would not be able to say I am paying to myself or I am receiving from myself. So therefore, the capital contribution made by the proprietor, the withdrawals by the proprietor, if it is included in the cash and bank to tally this total collection and total payments, this portion of the cash and bank of the withdrawals, cash and bank portion of the contributions to be removed to ascertain total collection, cash collection, to ascertain total payment and cash payment, and then we have to ascertain the percentage. For the purpose of reckoning, this 5% capital contribution by the proprietor, withdrawals by the proprietor would not be countable. But can we extend the same logic for a partnership firm where partners are contributing for capital or partners are drawing from the partnership? That answer would be slightly difficult as compared to the previous one. For a proprietor, one can say, I am not able to say I am receiving from myself or I am paying to myself. For a partnership, income tax law recognizes partnership different from partners. General law does not distinguish between partners and partnership. However, income tax law distinguishes the difference between partner and partnership. According to income tax law, partners are different from partnership. So money received from the partner by the partnership, money received by the partner from the partnership have to be counted for ascertaining this 5%. That cannot be diluted. So is the case in the case of AOP. Therefore, for a proprietor, we can exclude. For a partnership or AOP, it may not be possible to exclude. Whether a tax audit is required for a company with a turnover of 50 lakh with 30% cash receipt declares 4% profit. Three companies now discussed here. Turnover 50 lakh, 30% of cash dealings and declares 4%. For a company doing business, we'll have to go to class A of 44AB. Carrying on business, total sales gross receipt turnover does not exceed 1 crore. When the turnover is 50 lakh, less than a crore, under income tax law for this company, audit is not warranted. It may have 4% profit, 40% profit, 4% loss. It may have 30% cash receipt, 50% cash receipt. So long as the turnover does not exceed 1 crore, this company is not liable for audit under income tax law. It will be liable for audit under Companies Act irrespective of its turnover. But however, under income tax law, this company would not be liable for carrying out audit. Whether a tax audit is required for a company with turnover of more than 1 crore with 100% banking receipt and declares only 4% profit. Now the same query, the queryist would like to alter it. Instead of 50 lakh, the turnover is more than 1 crore for a company. Now again, more than 1 crore. Generally, more than 1 crore audit should be applicable. But now we'll test it based on the proviso below class A. Proviso below class A says so long as your sales, your cash receipt does not exceed 5% of the total receipt, cash payment does not exceed 5% of the total payment, then instead of 1 crore up to 5 crore, you are not required to get the accounts audited. Now the queryist here says turnover more than 1 crore, but how much more over and above crore? It is silent. So long as it does not cross 5 crore, so long as 100% banking receipts and banking payments, irrespective of the percentage of profit, the particular company is not liable for audit under income tax law. Probably under Companies Act, audit is warranted, whereas under income tax law, this case is not liable for audit. Now, we'll go to class B for appreciation further. Mr. R, a doctor or is a medical practitioner having clinic as well as medical shop. His turnover or a sale from a medical shop 70 lakh. Gross receipt from medical profession 40 lakh. For him, whether 44AB is applicable is something which we will have to examine. Now, class A of 44AB says every person carrying on business, if total sales, turnover, gross receipt in business exceed 1 crore. So in this business, turnover does not exceed 1 crore. So audit is not warranted here. Every person carrying on profession shall, if his gross receipt in profession exceed 50 lakh, shall get the accounts audited. His gross receipts from profession does not exceed 50 lakh. And between class A and class B, the word here used is R. That means for the purpose of reckoning this quantum, we'll have to independently see business separately, profession separately. Business turnover and professional gross receipts are not required to be aggregated. For business all, the turnover does not exceed 1 crore. Professional turnover, the gross receipt does not exceed half a crore. Audit would not be warranted. So in this case, neither class A would apply nor class B would apply. Now let us examine this case further. This doctor says, I am not required to get the accounts audited in terms of class A for my medical shop activities. Can I go under 44AD for this? 44AD subsection 6 says, notwithstanding anything mentioned in the foregoing portion of the provisions of this section, the provisions of this section shall not apply to a profession specified in section 44AA subsection 1. Section 44AA subsection 1 deals with 11 professionals, specified professionals. One specified profession there is medical profession. Any person having being a specified professional, for him, section 44AD is not in statute because subsection 6 says so. Subsection C says, notwithstanding anything contained in this section, the provisions of this section shall not apply to a person having profession covered under 44AA subsection 1. That means for him in the Income Tax Act, 44AD is not there. That being the case, this gentleman, a professional notified under 44AA subsection 1, for him 44AD is not there in statute. Neither 44AB class A would apply, and for him 44AD is not there in statute. So what he can do, turnover is less than 100 lakhs, he can maintain books, whatever is the net income out of the 70 lakh, 3%, 2%, 5%, 8%, 10%, as per books, he can furnish his return. He is not required to go under 44AD. one side. Now, though technically the section reads so, this gentleman says, I would like to go under 44 AD. I'll offer 8%. I'll say I'm not maintaining books of account. Can he do so? Though section says nothing mentioned in this section shall apply to a person coming under 44 AA subsection 1, the schema of the income tax department in furnishing return of income permits an assessee having profession covered under 44 AA subsection 1 to opt for 44 AD subsection 1 for his business cases. So if schema permits, this assessee can say, I would go under 44 AD for this particular section, for this particular medical shop activities. I'll say I'm not maintaining books of account. I'll get the accounts. I'll not say I'm going to get the accounts audited. I'll go by 8%, comfortable. Now let us come to profession. He is not coming under class B because his turnover gross receipt has not exceeded 50 lakhs. But at the same time, 44 ADA would demand that being a profession specified under 44 AA subsection 1 is required to offer at least 50% of his gross receipt. If he says, okay, 40 lakh into 50%, 20 lakh I'll offer, he'll go under 44 ADA for his professional gross receipts. He is entitled to go under normal provision for this medical shop activity, or he can go under 44 AD subject to his choice. Now, this gentleman says, from my profession I have not got 50 lakh, 50%. My professional gross receipt 40 lakh, I got only 8 lakh. Now for that professional gross receipts of 40 lakh related activities, 44 ADA is unable to comply with. Therefore, 44 AB class class D would apply. Then he has to get the accounts audited only in relation to professional income. For the reason that he is getting the accounts audited under this activity, he is not required to include this also for the purpose of audit. For this, he can get the accounts audited if he is saying his income is less than 20 lakh from this activity. However, for this, either he can go with book results or he can go by 44 AD without doing audit. Choice is his. So this is how the interplay between 44 AD, 44 AB, 44 ADA one can contemplate and reconcile. Oh. A partnership firm of doctors practicing in medicine. The interest and remuneration earned by the partners from the firm are treated as professional income under business and profession head in the partner status. Whether this income can be considered as professional income under 44 ADA in the hands of partners. Now, what the querist would like to take up here, doctors are carrying on profession in partnership. From the partnership firm, remuneration is paid to the partners who happen to be professional doctors. These doctors would like to avail the benefit of section 44 ADA, whether this is permissible. The same question would apply for a business case as well. A partner in a firm will also equally like to ask, I am a partner in a firm. That firm pays me interest and remuneration. Can I go under 44 AD and offer 8% of my interest and remuneration? Will this be permissible? Is what the partner also would like to ask. Similar is the case of a professional firm's partner would like to say, can I go under 44 ADA? Now, in order to trigger the provision of 44 ADA or for that matter 44 AD, the assessee must carry on that profession or business. Now, when a partnership firm carries on the profession or the business, the partnership firm only carries on the business or profession. The partner is not carrying on the business. He is only receiving the income from the firm in the capacity of a partner in the firm. Through the firm, he is carrying on the business or profession as the case may be. But however, It is not he who carries on that business or profession, it is the firm. So therefore, availing the benefit of presumptive provisions in the hands of the partners on the interest and remuneration received by the partner from the firm is not acceptable, is what Honorable Madras Tribunal in A. Ananda Kumar case has highlighted in a business context. But one can also explore the possibility. Other way, suppose this particular person receives interest and remuneration from the firm, but for the purpose of making investment in firm, he has borrowed money and then invested. Let us say, for example, this doctor borrowed money elsewhere, invested in the partnership firm, with the help of which only the partnership firm acquired instruments, equipments, and it pays interest. Now, the partner, from the interest received from the firm and the remuneration received from the firm, whatever interest he pays to third parties, he would like to claim. And the partnership firm, to earn the income from the partnership firm, he uses his personal car and he would like to claim depreciation, a portion of the depreciation, leaving a portion for personal purpose. Insurance on the car, driver salary on the car, the repairs and maintenance of the car, and fuel expense of the car, all you would like to claim proportionately. After claiming all these expenditure and allowances, interest received from the firm, salary received from, minus all this expenditure, the balance is falling below 50% of the interest and remuneration received from the firm. He can jolly well go with the actual number. There is no need to over 50% minimum. He can go with the actual number. Whether the deduction is 50%, deduction is more than 50%, deduction is less than 50%, as long as he has incurred the expenditure and is eligible for allowances, he can claim that at actuals, and whatever be the actual result, he can offer, rather than invoking section 44 AD in a business case or 44 ADA in a professional case. That is what Honorable Madras Tribunal in A. Ananda Kumar case has upheld. Now, Mr. Q is engaged in retail trade as well as money lending business. His turnover and profits for the first year of business as under. Money lending business 25 lakhs is interest receipts, net profit 5 lakh, turnover 20% profit. In a retail trade, 50 lakh is the turnover, but 3 lakh is the profit, totally 6%. Now he would like to know whether for the money lending, he will go under 44 AD, but for retail, he'll say less than, because being retail anyway, cash will come. 6% only, therefore he'll go under 44 AD, get the accounts audited, whether he can vivisect or bifurcate and go about it. It's a question before him. Now, for a 44 AD, unlike 44 AE, previous 44 AF, you can't do it business wise. You have to do assessee wise, excluding the ineligible businesses. Excluding the ineligible cases, all eligible businesses we should aggregate and then test it for 44 AD. It is not possible for us to say we will vivisect them business wise, and for each business we will say for this business I'll apply 44 AD. I'll go under 44 AD. If for this business I will say 44 AD I don't want, I'll go under 44 AB. Not possible. You will have to aggregate and see. Now we'll aggregate it. Now in aggregation, total turnover is 75 lakh. Net profit is 8 lakh. That works out to 10.67 total. Having aggregated, business line wise, we are not required to establish 8% profit or 6% as the case may be. In aggregate, the net profit offered is equivalent to 8 or 6 as the case may be, or more. Then the section is satisfied. So after aggregating net profit, after aggregating turnover, net profit over net turnover, the turnover in total, if you see the percentage, so long as the percentage touches or crosses 8% or 6% as the case may be, section is complied with. So we can go after aggregation, go under 44 AD, but vivisecting business wise is not possible. Now, we'll take another example. Mrs. S and Company, a firm engaged in the business of trading in rice. First year, 16-17, 80 lakh turnover, 4 lakh profit, that means 5%, less than 8%, therefore it went under audit. 1718, turnover 82 lakh. Again 5% margin. It went under audit. Assessment year 1819, turnover 84 lakhs. Taxable income 4.2 lakhs. Again 5% margin, went under audit. Assessment year 1920, turnover 90 lakhs. Taxable income 4.5 lakhs. It is now going to file return for that year. Would like to know whether audit is necessary, or else we'll advance 1 year and again see what is the scenario. Now less than 8 or 6% as the case. Trading in rice, cash receipts are there. Therefore, to the extent of cash 8%, to the extent of non-cash 6%. But unfortunately, they are unable to meet this deadline. They would like to know whether audit is warranted. Now, for this, we need to appreciate certain changes in law. Prior to assessment year 1718, the law was slightly different in 44 AD. Up to assessment year 1617, the law was different. From the assessment year 1718, the law was different. What was the difference? 4 and 5, subsection 4 and 5 made the change. We'll have to understand that carefully. Subsection 4 of section 44 AD, prior to assessment year 1718 up to assessment year 1617, said provisions of chapter 17C relating to advance tax shall not apply to an eligible SC insofar as they relate to eligible business. For an eligible SSC, to the extent of income from eligible business, whatever tax payable, to that extent, advance tax is not required to be paid. This is what subsection 4 said. But from assessment year 1718, that subsection 4 underwent a change. What does it say? Subsection 1 says you should offer 8% or 6% as the case may be. Where an eligible SSC declares profit for any previous year in accordance with the provisions of this section. That means previously he has offered in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, sometime consecutively or otherwise, he has offered in accordance with subsection 1 of 44 AD. Now, and he declares profit in for any of the 5 assessment year succeeding such previous year, not in accordance with the provisions of subsection 1. Meaning 1 year he has offered. In any of the subsequent 5 years, he is offering income from that business, income not in accordance with subsection 1. Subsection 1 says 8 or 6% you should offer. He is not able to offer that much. In that case, 1 year he has offered, next 5 years will count. In that next 5 years window period, any 1 year he is unable to offer that 8 or 6%. Then he shall not be eligible to claim the benefit of the provisions of this section for 5 assessment years subsequent to the assessment year relevant to the previous year in which profit has not been declared in accordance with the provisions of subsection 1. Let us say year 1 he has offered, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6. In any one of this 5 year, 1 year, let us say year 3 is unable to offer 8 or 6%. Year of walking out plus 5 more year. Third year is walking out, third year is over, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That year of walking out plus 5 more years, he is not eligible to claim the benefit of 44 AD subsection 1. He has to get out. What subsection 4 says. Now let us come to subsection 5 of this section, pre-post amendment. Up to assessment year 1617, subsection 5 said, if the assessee claims his profit from eligible business is lower than what is stated in subsection 1, he has to maintain books, he has to get the accounts audited. But from assessment year 1718, subsection 5 has got a different language. What does it say? An assessee to whom provisions of subsection 4 applicable, only for that assessee, accounts have to be maintained and that has to be audited. To whom subsection 4 applies? An assessee who has previously offered under 44 AD and in any one of the subsequent 5 years, 1 year he walks out, year of walking out plus 5 more years, subsection 4 is not applicable. Now let us come to subsection 44 AB class E. What does it say? An assessee carrying on business If the provisions of subsection 4 of 44 AD applicable, then should get his accounts audited. So keeping this fundamentals in mind, let us see this example now. Assessment year 16-17, old law. He is unable to offer 8%. He has to get the accounts audited. Assessment year 17-18, law underwent a change. What does it say? 82 lakhs, less than 8 or 6%. But prior year he was not under 44 AD subsection 1. To test this, we have to see the previous year what happened. In the previous year, he was not under 44 AD subsection 1. That means this year, for him, subsection 4 is not applicable. Subsection 5 of 44 AD not applicable. Therefore, 44 AB class E not applicable. Ignorantly, he has furnished 44 AB report. Again, let us come to this. This year, to test this year, first we see previously whether he has opted 44 AD subsection 1. Previously was not under 44 AD subsection 1. If previously was not under 44 AD subsection 1, this year subsection 4 is not applicable, subsection 5 is not applicable. Since subsection 4 of 44 AD not applicable, 44 AB class E not applicable. Therefore, this assessee is not required to get the accounts audited for this year. Ignorantly has followed that. Now let us come to this year. Previously was not under 44 AD subsection 1 any of the past years. Therefore, for him, for this year, subsection 4 is not applicable. As because he is offering less, he is not working out. Therefore, audit is not warranted. Therefore, from assessment year 17-18, all and sundry cases where less than 8 or 6%, audit not wanted. You are not required to get the accounts audited. First, we'll have to ask what happened in the last year. Last year, ASSI was inside 44 AD and then count locked for 5 years. Inside 44 AD, locked for 5 years. In that 5 years, any 1 year he walks out. Year of walking out and 5 more years. Only we have to test 44 AB class E. Otherwise, 44 AD does not require in all and sundry cases where the income offered is less than 8 or 6% of the turnover, necessarily accounts have to be audited. That's the important change came in assessment year 17-18 onwards, which one has to keep it in mind. Now, with the same case, slightly numbers are altered. 17-18, he went under 44 AD. 8.5% he claimed without books of account. 18-19, he went under 44 AD. 9% income he has offered. Now, 19-20, assessment year 19-20, his turnover was 210 lakhs. A person can continue to remain in 44 AD so long as the turnover does not exceed 200 lakhs. Now he is not walking out here. To trigger 44 AD subsection 4, previously under 44 AD, next 5 years, he should voluntarily walk out. Section should not throw him out. He must have to walk out voluntarily. Now in this case, in 19-20, he is not voluntarily opting out. The section is not applicable to him. Therefore, he got the accounts audited under 44 AB class A, not class E. Now this year again turnover came down. Whether the restriction would apply, answer would be no, because he has not walked out to trigger 44 AB class E. He would like to take under 44 AD, he can still come. Nothing prevents him to come under 44 AD. Now, assessment year 17-18, 80 lakh turnover, 8.5% he has offered, 44 AD. Next year, turnover is less than 200 lakhs, but he opted less than 8%, he walked out voluntarily in terms of 44 AD subsection 4 read with 44 AB class E. Now, that means year of walking out plus 5 years, lock in. Year of walking out and next 5 years, he is locked in. He cannot opt in. He cannot opt into 44 AD. Now next year, 210 lakhs, gone beyond 200 lakhs. Thereafter came down, but still, since this year he has voluntarily walked out, from this year, 5 more years, he cannot come under 44 AD. He cannot come under 44 AD. He has to test it only under 44 AB. An individual is doing trading business. Till assessment year 19-20, he was filing ITR 3, not availed 44 AD. Current year turnover is 1.5 crore, 1.1 crore. Profit is 2 lakh. Whether taxable income below 2.5 lakh, whether audit is warranted. Now, till last year, he was not under 44 AD. That means he is under normal provision. For this year, he is not opting out. So therefore, subsection 4 of 44 AD would not apply. 44 AB class E would not apply. Now we'll have to test it under 44 AB class A. For class A, turnover exceeding 1 lakh, 1 crore, audit warranted. But from this year, if the cash transaction is less than 5% of the total receipts and payment, up to 5 crore audit is not warranted. If cash transaction is more than 5%, audit would be warranted. If audit is warranted, can you take a defense saying my profit is less than 2.5 lakh, I'm not even required to file return. When I'm not required to file return, I will also not get the accounts audited. For the purpose of 44 AB, class A, class B, class C, income exceeding basic limit, not criteria. Whether or not income exceeds basic limit, audit is necessary. Class D and class E, in addition to class getting triggered, income must also exceed basic limit. For this normal business case, profession case, and 44 AE cases, even if the income does not exceed basic limit, audit is warranted. One cannot avoid audit. You may not be required to file return, but you will not be able to say, for that reason, I will not give the audit report also. Necessarily, audit report has to be appended. Return may not be required to be filed. Now, assessment year 2021, turnover above 1 crore, but net profit below 8%, total income below threshold, whether audit is required. Again, total income less than basic limit, return is not required. Above 1 crore, less than 5 crore, cash transaction less than 5%, audit not warranted. Above 1 crore, less than 5 crore, cash transaction more than 5%, audit would be warranted. Net profit irrespective of the percentage, because we are not testing under 44 AD, therefore irrespective of percentage, depending on turnover and cash transaction, we'll have to decide whether audit is required or not. And income exceeding basic limit or otherwise would be only for the purpose of deciding whether return has to be filed or not for the purpose of deciding whether audit is required or not. Because if you see in class A, class B, class C, nowhere it says income must exceed basic limit. But if you see class D, dealing with 44 ADA cases, income exceeds maximum amount not chargeable to tax. 44 AD, income exceeds maximum amount not chargeable to tax. So for 44 AD cases, profession less than 50 lakh, offering not 50%, income must exceed basic limit. 44 AD cases previously under 44 AD, next 5 years, any 1 year walks out, year of walking out, next 5 years lock-in period, income not able to be 8 or 6%, but income must exceed basic limit to trigger the audit, otherwise not warranted. This comfort of income exceeding basic limit available in class D and class E, not available for class A, class B, class C. In those cases, even if the income does not
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, please kindly repeat this 44 AD and ADA, sir, please. What you tell just now.
Income, in case of class D, 44 ADA says income, a gross receipt of the notified profession less than 50 lakh. Assessee is unable to offer 50%. Therefore, he is getting the accounts audited. In that case, if the income exceeds basic limit only, audit is warranted. I will give an example. 30 lakh rupees is the gross receipt of a doctor. 50% 15 lakh. He says, sorry, I am unable to offer 15 lakh. That year I don't have 15 lakh profit. I've got more of other expenditure. He says, my income is only 5.5 lakh rupees from this gross receipt. From that 5.5 lakh rupees, I've got interest on housing loan. Also, I've got ATC deductions. I avail all these things from that 5.5 lakhs. Therefore, my total taxable income falls to 2.25 lakhs. Now you see, 30 lakh is the professional gross receipt. 50% works out to 15 lakh. He is unable to offer 15 lakh. He is offering 5.5 lakh. But ultimate taxable income is less than 2.5 lakh. In this case, although he is not able to offer 50% of his gross receipt, this year he is not required to get the accounts audited by invoking 44 ADA read with 44 AB class D, because 44 AB class D says if the person is unable to offer income to the extent of 50% as contemplated, but however his income must exceed basic limit to trigger audit, otherwise not required. Similarly, in 44 AD cases, previously under 44 AD, in any of the 5 years he walks out, year of walking out plus 5 more years, not able to offer 5% or 6% or 8% lesser income is offering, audit is necessary. In that year, If the income exceeds basic limit, only he has to audit. The income is falling below, then he's not required to get the accounts audited. This comfort available for 44 AD and 44 ADA, not available for a case where a professional has got more than 50 lakh. Income is less than 2.5 lakh, but still he has to get the accounts audited. A business case where turnover is more than 1 crore, total income is less than 2.5 lakh, still he has to get the accounts audited. So the benefit of income exceeding basic limit is contemplated only in 44 ADA cases requiring audit, 44 AD cases requiring audit, not 44 AE cases, other business cases, other professional cases.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
This is one query very interestingly came up. An individual with a proprietorship form. He has got a supply order or a contract from a government of India to provide a system for online geo-registration of aerial video of satellite images. In this contract, I supply requisite hardware and develop software. The total contract value is somewhere falling between 1 to 1.5 crore. Can he declare income under 4480? Now it is a composite contract. In this composite contract, it's ideal to bifurcate the contract into software supply, hardware supply. Let us say example, hardware supply 30 lakhs, hardware supply 30 lakhs, software supply 1.2 crore. The question is, for that software supply, he has to examine whether 44AB class B would apply. For hardware supply, he has to see whether 44AB class A or 44AD would apply. Now we have to bifurcate. Hardware supply here 30 lakhs, less than 1 crore. 44AB class A would not apply. And if this is the first year, now he can go with his book results 30 lakh, 3%, 4%. Previously not under 44AD, no problem at all. So he can go with his actuals. But he's not willing to maintain booksafe account. He would like to go under 44AD, 30 lakh into 8%, 2.4 lakh, he can offer. Nothing wrong. Coming to software, 1.2 crore. This 1.2 crore software revenue. In this software 1.2 crore, exceeding 50 lakh. Therefore, 44AB class B audit is warranted. Now, number is slightly altered. 30 lakh is software, 1.2 crore hardware. 1.2 crore hardware exceeding 1 crore. Generally, audit is warranted. But if money comes only from the government and all his payments are only through banking channel, 1 to 5 crore, he is able to establish less than 5% is only bank receipts and payments, cash payments. In that case, up to 5 crore, audit is not warranted. So he can go with book results, no problem at all. Still, he would, since 1.2 crore is falling below 2 crore, he would like to go by 8%. Under 44AD, he can go. 30 lakhs is the professional gross receipt, less than 50 lakh. Software professional is contemplated under 44AA subsection 1 as a notified professional. Therefore, for him, less than 50 lakh, at least 50% he should offer. 30 lakh into 50%, 15 lakh. If he claims he is unable to offer 15 lakh, income is less, 44ADA requires that he has to maintain books, get the accounts under audited under 44AB class D. So information technology is professional is one of the notified professional, and our code prescribed in the written filing for computer related service categorically says under 44ADA you can come with software development, software consultancy, data processing, BPO, etc. And these cases, computer training, education institute, cyber cafe, all that will come under 44AD. So therefore, software development will come under 44ADA notified professional so long as gross receipt is less than 50 lakh. Gross receipt exceeding 50 lakh, audit would be mandatory under 44AB class B. What is the monetary limit for trust for tax audit? Trust as such is not governed under 44AB per se, because we would say they are doing only charity or religious activity. So therefore, trust would be liable for audit under 12A subsection 1 class B if the income before applying section 11 and 12 exceeds basic limit. Now the trust has got a business in terms of section 11 subsection 4. Let us say, for example, one person has given one running business to a trust and saying out of this income from business you do charity. His ongoing business is given as a charity to the charity as a donation. Now separate books are to be maintained for that business. If that business turnover exceeds 1 crore, then for that audit would be warranted under 44AB. If that is not the case, regular donations received, schools, colleges, hospitals, etc., tax audit would not be required, but audit under 12A subsection 1 class B would be required. A firm engaged in management consultancy service, will it be covered under 44 ADA or AD? Now again, the code prescribed in the written filing form in the schema would help us. Now, profession contemplated accounting related consultancy, because accountancy is one of the notified profession. Their accounting, bookkeeping, tax consultancy, all business and management consultancy is also considered as 44 ADA. Therefore, that will come under 44 ADA as a profession, not as business under 44 AD. Of course, these are all small things. Let us not spend more time on it. And now I will just leave few minutes for queries, if any, relating to applicability of tax audit. Then we'll get into other queries relating to classes in 3CD. Now I leave to the office bearers to pick up any queries which has come up in Q&A or anything for 2-3 minutes to just break the monotony. You can decide. Anything has come in Q&A, sir? I think there is one query I could see. SSC individual turnover of 80 lakh and there is a loss of 5 lakh. Other income 6 lakhs. Net taxable income is 1 lakh. Applicable or not? I think we have explained. Turnover is 80 lakh. Less than 1 crore. 44 AB class A would not apply. Previously, so long as the SA has not opted under 44 AD, this case turnover is less than 80 lakh, therefore audit is not warranted. Taxable income is less than the basic limit, therefore return is not required to be paid. What will be the answer if in the above? Net taxable income is 2.5 lakh, and what will be the answer if the taxable income is 4.5 lakh? See, with reference to turnover 80 lakh, not exceeding 100 lakh, therefore audit not warranted. If the income exceeds basic limit, return has to be filed. Turnover 80 lakh, business loss 5 lakh, taxable income below exemption limit. So now the exemption limit is 2.5 lakh. For rebate under 87A up to 5 lakh, there is no tax. That doesn't mean the basic limit itself is extended to 5 lakh. Basic limit is only 2.5 lakh. Maximum amount up to which tax will not be levied is only 2.5 lakh. First to 2.5 lakh to 5 lakh, the income falls below, between 2.5 to 5, there will not be tax because of 87A rebate. But the basic limit is only 2.5 lakh. If the income exceeds basic limit of 2.5 lakhs, return has to be filed. If the turnover is from speculative business, whether speculative or otherwise, so long as turnover is 80 lakh rupees, audit is not warranted, sir. And as long as the income exceeds 2.5 lakh, even though ultimately tax is not payable, return needs to be filed. If the income is falling below 2.5 lakhs, the return itself need not be filed. I think we have answered any other query in the chat box. I think we have answered all the queries raised. Convener, sir, shall we give 1 or 2 questions to the participants, or we'll proceed on the remaining slides? How do you like it to be, sir? Amish, sir, you will have to tell me. Shall we wait for 1 or 2 queries from the participants, or we'll proceed, sir? Amish, sir, can you hear me? Amish sir, can you hear me or?
His mic is not working, sir. So
Can-
he has converted that one query is still left, so you can take that one query and then we can proceed.
Okay, nice. Is one more query has come. Okay. If a professional having 40 lakh turnover with 10 lakh net profit, whether audit is required as it is less than 50 lakh. Yes. Now as a profession, now the profession, we'll have to see whether it is the profession specified. That means 44A subsection 1. Doctor, lawyer, chartered accountant, or the information technology, company secretary, cost accountant, all. Now, professional turnover, the gross receipt is less than 50 lakh. Now, in that case, 40 lakh is less than 50 lakh, then at least we should offer 50%. That is not possible. In that case, maintenance of accounts, getting the accounts audited cannot be avoided. Naturally, audit is warranted in this case. So, shall we now go to the other slide, sir? We'll go. Fine. Oh, one more query coming. Is there any query, Mr. Vaibhav Shakla's query left?
Sir, can I ask now?
Yeah, please. Not a
Sir,
problem.
regarding 44 AD only, suppose if business income is there, it is 80 lakhs rupees
Gross receipt.
gross receipts, and there is loss,
Okay.
or there is profit, but other income from housing properties there is loss. So net taxable income is below 2.5 lakhs.
Okay.
So audit will not be required, right, sir?
Now, first 44 AD, we are saying what happened in the previous year, whether the assessee opted for 44 AD.
No, it was under audit. AB 44 AB,
For
more
AB.
than 1 crore.
More than 1 crore. Last year we underwent audit. This year turnover came down 80 lakh.
Yes.
Being the first year after 44 AB, we don't need to worry about 44 AD at all.
Okay.
44 AD audit under, because of 44 AD audit would be required. First previous year he must have inside 44 AD.
Okay.
This year he should opt out of 44 AD. If in the previous year he was not under 44 AD, current year question of opting out does not arise.
Okay.
Therefore, in this year, turnover is less than 100 lakhs, irrespective of the profit percentage, no audit. It could be 3%, 5% plus, minus, anything. Audit is not warranted. If the income is going to be above basic limit, return is required to be filed. Income is going to be less than basic limit and you would like to maintain the records, he can file. Income is going to be negative, to preserve the loss, he can file. That is only for the purpose of filing return. For audit purpose, less than 100 lakhs, audit not warranted. More than 100 lakhs, audit warranted. 44 AD, 8%, 6% minus plus, all will not be required to be seen, so long as in the previous year he was not inside 44 AD. If in the previous year he was inside 44 AD and this year he walks out, only then we will have to see. This year less than 8%, less than 6%, audit is warranted. But however, in this case, his total income is going to be minus or going to be less than 2.5 because of house property loss or because of chapter 6A benefit, 80C, 80D, 80G. In that case, even though less than 8 or 6%, audit is not warranted.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Fine. Now we'll get into certain classes related provisions. And the related provisions also will combine as and when it is warranted. If partnership firm filing first year return having turnover of less than 1 crore, whether audit is applicable. Again, it's a partnership firm, very first year turnover is less than 1 crore. Then 44 AB, class A, we have to test. Class A, business, less than 100 lakhs, no audit. Then we have to go to class D. Class D says class E, previously under 44 AD. It was the first year, previously was not under 44 AD. Therefore, 8%, 6% minus plus, nothing need to be seen. Audit is not warranted. As per book results, we can file the return. If still some more queries are there, we will now park it and we'll take it up after this few more slides are over. We will take it up along, even though it relates to applicability of audit. Facts of the case of an individual being proprietor of 2 or more business. He borrowed money in his personal capacity. That means Mr. A has got one business, rice trading, another one money lending. He is proprietor of more than one business activity. He borrowed money in his personal capacity. Interest on the loan from that borrowing paid in his personal capacity. No TDS was effected on the interest paid on the loan borrowed. The borrowings, interest payment are not recorded in the proprietary concerns books of account, but routed through the capital account. Any obligation on the tax auditor to report the particulars in form number 3CD in respect of loan borrowed, loan repaid, no TDS for the interest paid. Now, let us say one is trading business, other one is money lending business. For funding the capital to these two business, he has borrowed elsewhere. That is in his personal books, not in these business books. These two business books he is giving to us for audit. We are carrying out audit. When we are carrying out audit from the business books, we are able to see he has introduced capital. For servicing the loan, interest principal, periodically is drawing money. But the entries in the books say capital contribution, money withdrawn by the proprietor. Similar is the case in the other business. Although we are aware of the fact that he has borrowed money, he has used it for business, he is paying interest, he has not deducted tax at source, be that as it may. From the business books point of view, when we are aggregating the business and furnishing 3CD for both the business together, we are not required to comment about money borrowed in class 31. We are not required to comment anything about the amount repaid in class 31. We are not required to worry about application of section 36 subsection 1 class 3 dealing with interest. We are not required to worry about the non-deduction of tax at source on the interest paid, because in the P&L account of the business, there is no entry towards interest on the loan borrowed. But what would happen in the hands of the person who is preparing the return for this assessment? After we furnish the tax audit report, income from business A, income from business B aggregated. That's the total. Then the deductions against this income, but not debited to P&L account, he would like to claim, one out of which would be interest. Now this assessee in the previous year liable for tax audit. He is already subjected to tax audit. This year for the interest payment, he ought to have deducted tax at source. He has not deducted tax at source. Therefore, this interest payment, for the reason that tax is not deducted tax at source, 40A1A would get triggered. Though entry is not made in the books of account, against the deduction of this particular expenditure on the income from businesses, when we claim this deduction, 40A1A would get triggered, and therefore 30% of this expenditure will be disallowed. Subsequent year, when he deducts and remits TDS, he is entitled to claim 30% of this expenditure. But as tax auditor, class 31 relating to loan borrowed and loan repaid, we don't have anything to comment. In respect of TDS also, TDS non-deduction of tax at source on the interest, we are not required to comment anything. Please explain in detail with practical illustration regarding the differences in reporting requirements of 31C and 31D, since both the classes are asking about the particulars of repayment of loan. Again, practical list. So the queries would like to know the difference between 31C and D. Both appears one and the same. How does it deal with, especially when the context of 269T? 269T, now we see class D and E of 31 dealing with 269T. Repayment of loan or deposit or specified advance in an amount exceeding the limit specified under 269T, received otherwise by a check or bank draft. We are repaying loan, but we'll have to go to the origin of this repayment. How did we receive? Today we are repaying. How did we receive? If it is received otherwise than by a check or a bank draft, that means in cash. When we received in cash and today we are repaying, that has to be mentioned in class D. Repayment of loan in an amount exceeding the limit prescribed under 269T, received by check but not account payee. When we received it, we received through instruments, but it is not through account payee crossed instrument. But today we are repaying. Those two things we'll have to report separately. So what happens now? We are repaying today. We'll have to go back to the origin of the receipt of money. Originally, we have received through account payee instrument or ECS. Originally, we have received through instrument but not account payee. Originally, we have received through cash. In that case, we are repaying, but originally we received in cash. We are repaying today, but originally we received an instrument other than account payee. Those two are required to be reported here. So in addition to reporting the current year repayment, we'll have to trace the origin of original receipt of loan, how we received it, and accordingly we'll have to classify 31D and E. In other words, earlier year we have borrowed, or current year we have borrowed. Let us take two examples. Loan borrowed in earlier year and current. How did we borrow? If earlier we have borrowed, nothing to worry. This year we are borrowing. Account payee we have borrowed. Not in account payee we have borrowed. In cash we have borrowed. 31A, at the time of borrowing, we will have to say. 31C, at the time of repaying, we have to see. But 31D and E says you are repaying, but if you have repaid in 269D, but how did you borrow? By in cash, report in D. By check other than account pay, report in E. Apart from reporting in 31C. This is what this section talks about. Whether section 269 SST would apply for the following: loan given by the partner to the firm about 20,000 or about 2 lakh rupees. Amount withdrawn by the partner from the firm. Loan given by the director to the company. Capital introduced by the proprietor. So whether the provisions of section 269 SS, 269T or ST would apply in this case. Now, with reference to proprietor, we have already considered that it is only money transferred from one pocket to another pocket. Therefore, there is no borrowing, there is no repayment. Therefore, capital introduced by the proprietor or withdrawn by the proprietor will not be hit by this provision. From business books to personal books or personal book to business books, it will not be hit. Coming to partnership, it will not take the character of loan, although nomenclature is so. It will be considered as partner's contribution or partner's withdrawal. Therefore, section 269 SS or 269 T would not apply. But however, 269 ST would apply. If one single transaction of partner with a firm or vice versa touching or crossing 2 lakh rupees, then 269 ST would apply in case of partner's transaction with the partnership or vice versa. Now, coming to director, at least we have a better pedestal compared to firm and partner, but that is not the case in case where the director and company. Though there are judgments, I am aware of the fact that Idayam publication, Madras High Court, Kumudam publication, all went to say director's account can be treated as director's current account as if proprietor or partner, and therefore 269 SS would not apply. But nowadays, time has flown, very difficult to sail that theory. Those days, ignorance, etc., one can take a plea, but number of years passed by, it is very difficult. So therefore, 269 SS would apply. Supposing somebody claims 269 SS would not apply, one has to test under 269 ST. So director's current account, 269 SS or 269D, anyone would take in SS itself would apply. If he sail through, at least 269 ST off. Less than 2 lakh one can succeed, but 2 lakh and above one would not be able to sail through. For a partnership, one can always take a difference to say partner and firm one and the same, therefore no need to report. Other view that partner is different from firm, therefore need to be reported, is a very conservative view, but one can always take a stand depending on the risk appetite of the assessee concerned. Now next is that class 20B, creating many amount of difficulty for a case where there is a delay in payment of the employee's contribution to PF and ESF. Now class 20B says employees' contribution to labor welfare funds we have to report. Now, unlike employer's case, in employee's case, monthly reporting is warranted. And 3615A, the explanation below that categorically says due date means the due date as per the respective statute of the law. That means 15th of the succeeding calendar month. We will have to consider 15th of the succeeding calendar month. Now, if we say so, what happens? Even there is a delay. Although the payment is made before the due date of filing return, there is a delay by considering the due date as per the respective statute. In that case, definitely, irrespective of the judgments, Kerala High Court, Gujarat High Court, straight against the SSC. Recent days, Madras High Court is also leaning towards it. Karnataka High Court, Bombay High Court, Rajasthan, Delhi, in favor of the SSC. Now, irrespective of this, the CPC, while processing the return, sends 143 subsection 1 class A notice asking for objection. Irrespective of the objection filed, they process the return raising a demand. Now, only option available for assessee is to file an appeal, because under rectification it is very difficult to contend that is a mistake apparent from record, because for mistake to be considered as apparent from record, it should not be debatable. When 4 judgments of the High Court in favor of the assessee and 4 other High Court's judgment against the assessee, it is highly debatable, and therefore rectification proceedings may not yield benefit to the assessee. Therefore, appeal under filing under section 246A only would be helping the C, but it will be unnecessary unproductive work of challenging and then proceeding further. But that for the time being, that's the only option available to assessee one side. Now, to overcome this, can an assessee go to the extent of saying in the due date column of class 20 small b of form 3CD, instead of putting 15th of the succeeding calendar month, can I put the due date of filing return? Due date of filing return for the current year is 31/1. I myself will put all the cases as 31/1, and I say it is filed within the due date. Within the due date 31/1, I have paid all this. Therefore, no disallowance. We may put the date so, but in my opinion, the schema may not permit considering that as the date, and they will substitute the date as per the respective calendar year month's subsequent 15th day and disallow. But it's a very adventurous proposition the assessee could canvass. If the assessee is very much risk appetite enough to do so, in that case, para 5 of 3CD and para 3 of 3CA, we as tax auditor should draw attention of this particular concept introduced in class 20B of the tax audit report 3CD to say the due date as per the respective statute is the subsequent calendar month's 15th day. However, according to the C, relying on various High Court judgments, the due date up to filing of return of income can be factored for the purpose of section 3615A. Accordingly, the due date of filing return of income under 139(1) is reported in class 20B. Such a mention in para 5 of 3CB or para 3 of 3CA from tax auditor side is warranted so as to avoid any unpleasant consequences in a disciplinary proceeding if the case is taken up seriously. The next query is 43B. One interesting proposition emerges. Section whether 43B is applicable even for GST outstanding as at the end of the year, on the pretext that the same is not debited to P&L account and nothing to do with the P&L, profit and loss, as input output GST are debited to separate GST account in the books of account and appearing on the liability side of the balance sheet or the asset side of the balance sheet respectively. So the assessee's query here or the client's query or the auditor's query here would be assessee follows net method of accounting. He reports his income and expenses net of GST. Collections are shown as separately, remittances are shown against the collection account, netting the ITC as a liability outstanding in the balance sheet. It is nothing to do with the P&L account. In that case, the liability appearing in the balance sheet liability side on 31st March, do we need to worry about 43B? Is the question before us. Now, Saurangi Sales Bureau case, Honorable Supreme Court in 87 ITR categorically said like this: amount of sales tax collected should be held to be form part of trading or business receipt. The appellant would of course be entitled to claim deduction of the amount as and when it pays to state government. The fact that appellant credited the amount received as sales tax under the head sales tax collection account would not, in our opinion, make any material difference. It is true that nature and the quality of the receipt and not the head under which it is entered in the account books as would prove decisive. That means if you have collected an indirect tax levied, it is considered as part of your trading or business receipts. That means it is deemed to be considered as part of your credit in the P&L. So if I collect 100 rupees and I say 30 rupees is ideally available in ITC and 70 rupees I am going to make a provision on the end of the month. Next month 20th I am paying this 70 rupees. I may say I am accounting 100 as a collection in the liability side. ITC 30 rupees I am transferring from ITC account. 70 rupees I am showing in the liability side. Next month 70 rupees I am paying. But what the law says here, 100 I am crediting to P&L account because of this particular proposition. Again, 100 I am debiting to P&L account as a journal entry and taking to the liability side contra. Against that contra, 30 I am setting off ITC. 70 remains as the liability, which I am paying at the end of at the next month, 20th day. So that means there is a credit as well as debit to an equivalent amount. Credit is offered as income. Debit is claimed as deduction. To the extent of debit claimed, if there is outstanding, if it is paid on or before the due date of filing return, it will qualify. If it is not paid on or before the due date of filing return, it will not qualify. Entry made in the books of account would not be decisive, is what Honorable Supreme Court has mentioned. Therefore, making an entry in the books to show collection and payment as a balance sheet item, not a P&L item, would not help the assessee in application of section 43B if the balance outstanding on 31st March is not paid before the due date of filing return of income. Now, as per first proviso to 43B, the time limit for claiming the deduction is due date of filing return of income. But the tax authority's report is filed 1 month before the date. Due to this, there is a factual difference between the auditor and client. Those differences can possibly result in addition under 143(1). How to resolve it? At least in the past, up to assessment year 1920, we have cases where certain assessees filed their tax audit report earlier, July month, August month, for the sake of giving balance sheet to the bank. That time, the auditor filed a tax audit report and said bonus is not paid. But return is filed in the month of October, by which time bonus is paid. Therefore, in the statement of total income, the assessee claimed return is filed after claiming bonus. 143 subsection 1 class A, assessee received a notice from CPC. Your tax auditor said bonus not paid. You are claiming bonus paid. There is a difference between the two. As per subclass 4, where there is a disallowance contemplated in tax audit report but not done in the income computation in the return of income, CPC will disallow. So because of subclass 4, irrespective of the objection filed, CPC disallows. Now what to do? Either you'll have to file 154 or you have to go on appeal. In the past, current year, assessment year 2021, there is a gap between the date of filing or due date of filing tax audit report and due date of filing the return. 1 month time is there. That means up to the date of filing tax audit report, I'll say this much is paid, this much is outstanding. That outstanding, still 1 more month is available for assessee to pay. That the assessee can claim, but definitely divergent view would come up. CPC has so far has not taken this into account. In the return, outstanding as at 31st March, before the due date, how much is before the tax filing, tax audit report filing, how much is paid, after tax audit filing, before the due date, how much is paid and how much unpaid. That column is not there in the return. Therefore, disallowances are bound to come from this year. Hopefully, next year the return columns will be altered to incorporate these three: outstanding on 31st March, paid before the issuance of tax audit report, paid before the filing of return of income, how much unpaid. That classification as of today return is not having. Definitely disallowances would come when the CPC process the return. Appeal or rectification would be the option available for assessing. Whether March 2020 interest not debited to loan account of the borrower by the bank has to be taken as expense, will it be disallowed under 43B? Now March 2020 interest, because of COVID requirement, bank has not debited. Number is not very sizable. Assessee is also not accounting it. In that case, there is no claim at all, no disallowance at all. Profit will go, tax will be paid. Now, March entry is debited to P&L account. Bank also debited. But bank says, I'll give you moratorium. Pay on July, August, September, October. Now on 31st of March, it is not falling due. In that case, unless it has fallen due before the end of the financial year, it is not required to be paid. If the due date of that interest, as per the revised agreement between bank and assessee, falling after 31st March, disallowance is not required under 43B. Will there be disallowance? Will be allowance granted in a subsequent year in case of 40A7. The query is partly written. There is a gratuity provision, but no funding, no approved gratuity fund. So therefore provision is disallowed and by virtue of 40A7. Subsequently, sometime later, gratuity is paid. In the books of account, already there is a gratuity provision outstanding. So while making an entry for the payment is set off against the opening balance of the provision. There is no claim in the current year P&L. Now, what happens to the payment made towards gratuity in this year, which does not find place in the current year P&L? Is it eligible for deduction in the computation statement? Obviously, yes. In the year in which you made a provision, you disallowed it. Now, against that provision, you are making payment. In the year of actual payment, you are entitled. Similar to 43B, there are no classes or the columns to provide for this, but still under 37, this is an expenditure allowable under this particular year of payment, irrespective of the entry in the books. Year of payment of gratuity under section 37, the assessee is eligible for deduction. It is entitled to entry in the books or not decisive. Let us take this example. Fixed deposit made with a bank in December 19 for 3 years. Loan against FD taken in February. Assessee felt he had got surplus, he made a fixed deposit. Some financial crunch happened subsequently. He wanted to close the FD, but the manager said, don't close, you will lose interest accrued and rate of interest will come down. Better, we'll take a loan on FD. Temporarily, you can use it, no problem. Now, end of the year, interest accrued on FD, 1.5 lakh. Bank has deducted tax, 26 AS, it appears. Now, interest accrued on loan against that FD, 1.1 lakh. Entry made, confirmation obtained. But bank says, as per the normal practice, loan, interest on loan accrued. Deposit, interest on deposit accrued. End of the deposit period, loan and interest, deposit and interest, both independently aggregated, set off, net amount will be paid to the assessee. This is what they understand. Now, 43B says any same payable by assessee as interest on loan from a scheduled bank. Now, it's a scheduled bank loan on FD. Now, 1.1 lakh interest accrued entry is passed on 31st March. It is not paid up to 31st March, not going to be paid after 31st March, but before the due date of filing return. Will it be liable for disallowance under 43B? Now, if you carefully see, scheduled bank, interest on loan or advance from scheduled bank that is not paid in accordance with the terms and conditions of the agreement governing such loan or advance. Now, what is the terms and conditions of this interest on the loan? According to the terms and condition, assessee is not required to pay this interest on the loan against FD till the maturity of the FD. Bank itself says, don't pay interest, we'll accumulate. So what 43B can dictate, if the outstanding balance on 31st of March has already fallen due prior to the date, but you did not pay before the end of the day, also up to the due date of filing return, 43B can say there is a disallowance. Rather, 43B forces an assessee to make payment in the year of its accrual before the end of the financial year or before the due date of filing return. If the assessee is not required, legally obligated, contractually compelled to pay the money before 31st of March, 43B, because of 43B, law cannot compel him to pay that money. When the contractual obligation itself is not compelling an assessee to pay, 43B cannot compel an assessee to pay. That's the reason why I said in COVID-related cases, March 31st, bank charges interest, but bank says, don't pay before 31st March. Pay on July, pay in November. We'll give you 6 months moratorium. The due date itself falls in the next year. In that case, because of non-payment up to 31st of January, even if assuming for a moment as he could not pay up to 31st January, that 1 month accrued interest is not liable to be disallowed because in accordance with the terms and conditions, that is not falling due on 31st of March. Then we'll come to asset. Now we have seen so far expense. We'll come to assets related cases. An assessee is running nursing home following cash system of accounting. He purchased equipment on credit and used for business. Only part of the cost is paid. That equipment related liability is not fully settled. How to account for the cost in the books and claim depreciation? When assessee follows mercantile system of accounting, liability accrued, cost added, and therefore comfortably depreciation can be claimed for the entire amount. 1 lakh rupees is the equipment cost. 60,000 paid before the end of the financial year. Now in that case, if the mercantile system, for the entire 1 lakh asset put to use, depreciation can be claimed. And the assessee is following cash system. Out of 1 lakh rupees, 60,000 paid, and 40,000 remaining unpaid. That 40,000 remaining unpaid have to be reversed from the liability account to the concerned asset account. So asset account balance will come to 60,000. We can claim only a depreciation for that 60,000. Next year, when we are making 40,000 payment as addition, next year again, in the year of making payment, subject to the date of making payment, either half year or full year, depreciation can be claimed. In case payment is not made to the extent of unpaid portion, depreciation cannot be claimed. Repairs and maintenance expenses running into lakhs of rupees, sometimes the expenditure will get benefit more than 1 year, say 2 years. Whether it has to be considered as capital or revenue is what the query. Section class 21 subclass A, capital or revenue expense, we have to see. Empire Jute Company case, Honorable Supreme Court gives a very classic guidance as to when you will call it as capital or revenue. Ask a question whether you have got a new asset. The answer is yes, it is capital, not revenue. The answer is no. Ask next question. Whether your existing asset has been improved beyond its originally stated capacity. The answer is no. Expenditure is revenue. The answer is yes. Then it is capital. So if your existing asset has been repaired in such a fashion that it goes beyond its originally stated capacity, then it is capital, not eligible. If not, then it is revenue. In that revenue, you have to further ask a question to yourself: if the benefit is going to get only for a year or more than 1 year. If it is 1 year, fine, no problem. If the benefit is going to be more than 1 year, still it can be considered as revenue provided between you and the other party who is doing service for you. No obligation. Claim everything as one deduction. But if you and the other party has got an obligation to perform for over a period of time, then in the basis of the year for which the obligation remains, spread over. This is what Honorable Supreme Court has mentioned in 124 ITR page number 1 in Empire Jute Company case. Depending on that, we'll have to test this question. Repairs expense. Benefit may be for more than 1 year, but new asset has not come. None of the existing assets improved beyond its originally stated capacity. Irrespective of the number of years for which we get benefit, we are entitled to claim this as revenue deduction. This is a small query, we'll leave it off. In case of no deduction of tax at source, the auditor has to indicate the same in his report. This automatically calls for a disallowance of 30%. The Act also permits non-disallowance of the same if it is proved that the deductee has included the same in his income and produces CA certificate in form number 26A. Is there a way to indicate the same in the report, or can we take a stand not to show it and as a disallowable item in the report? Under which clause, what clause form 26A is to be mentioned when tax is not deducted at source? Is the question. Let's we'll combine this together. Now 40A1 and 40A1A, previously there was some difference between these two classes. Both are now having same proviso first and proviso 2 in common, first and second proviso. Section 201 subsection 1 first proviso says, if you don't deduct tax at source, you are assessing in default. That's what subsection 1 says. First proviso to section 201 says, if you have not deducted tax at source. However, the other person has included this payment as his income in his return of income, paid the tax, and he has filed the return of income and furnishes form number 26A to you. One part he will sign, other part his auditor would sign. In that case, you will not be considered as assessee in default. Now, second proviso below section 40A1 or 40A1A says, so long as an assessee is not regarded as assessee in default in terms of section 201 subsection 1 first proviso, then it shall be deemed that the assessee has deducted and remitted the tax on such payment in the year in which, or the date on which the payee furnishes the return of income. So that means on the date on which the payee furnishes the return of income, the deductor shall be deemed to have deducted and remitted tax. Before getting into this controversy, let us first make one point clear. the assessee has made an entry for TDS up to 31st March, before 31st March. Paid it before the due date of the TDS law 201. No problem. Not paid at least before the due date of furnishing return of income. No problem. Not paid before the due date of furnishing return of income, but thereafter it will be disallowed, but will be allowed in the year of payment 30% for resident, 100% for non-resident. Now, if the entry for deduction itself is not made in the financial year of the making payment, deduction entry and remittance entry is paid subsequent to the financial year. In that case, very difficult to say, I have made payment before the due date of filing return, therefore I should be entitled to claim the benefit in the first year itself. Very difficult. One can contest or argue, but it is very difficult. If that's the understanding we are reaching. Now, second proviso says, in the day, on the date of furnishing of return of income of the payee, the payer shall be deemed to have deducted and remitted the tax. That means the deduction and remittance both takes place in the on the date on which payee makes a payment, file the return of income. That means deduction does not take place in the financial year end. It takes place in the subsequent year. Then obviously second proviso cannot spare the disallowance. If somebody technically reads second proviso, year of non-deduction, disallowance would come. Year of filing of return of income by the payee, you will be eligible to claim without actually deducting tax at source. Then what will be the position? Year of non-deduction, necessarily disallowance. Year of filing of return by the other person, you will be benefited to the extent of the previously disallowed number without actually deducting tax at source. But this would not really help the SSC. Whether this is the objective with which the amendment has come, one can technically trouble. But if we carefully read again, the assessee shall be, to the extent to which first proviso to section 201(1) applies, in that case, the assessee shall be deemed to have deducted tax and remitted it on the day on which the other person has furnished the return of income. That means the other person has furnished return of income should be applicable only insofar as the remittance. It should not be tagged to the deduction. Deduction you should presume in the year of actual payment to party. The qualification of the date on which the other person has furnished return should be tagged to the date of payment. It shall be deemed that the payment is made on the day on which payee has furnished return of income. If we take that interpretation, in the year of actual payment, since the payee furnished return of income before the due date of assessee furnishing return of income, then one can take a view, no disallowance is warranted. Fine. But there are cases where the payer will furnish return first, payee will furnish return later, but still payer will say, I will anyway get 26A, don't disallow this. In that case, what one has to do? Get a management representation letter from the payee, our client, agreeing to provide form number 26A before the completion of assessment, since the payee takes little more time, and hopeful of getting it. Para 3 of 3CA, para 5 of 3CB, make a comment. In terms of class 21, subclass B, assessee is required to report the amount of such and such made to so and so of various parties on which tax is not deducted at source. According to assessee, the payee shall furnish form number 26A, and therefore no disallowance is warranted. Therefore, in view of the above, the amount required to be disallowed in terms of section 40A1 or 40A1A to be required to be reported in class 21 subclass B is not mentioned. Such a comment from the auditor is warranted in para 3 of 3CA or para 5 of 3CB. Now, class 34C deals with interest on TDS. Whether the interest to be reported in that class, whether it is in relation to or for the financial year 1920 when we are giving report for assessment year 2021, or whatever the interest paid during the year, irrespective of the year for which it is paid. This year I may pay 201 1-year interest, not only for the current 4 quarters, first 3 quarters, 4th quarter interest will be paid only next year. For the current 3 quarters, I will pay 201 1-year interest where there is a delay, and wherever there are delays noticed in the earlier cases, current year I will pay. Queries would like to know whether the interest actually paid under 201 1-year in this financial year, irrespective of the year for which it is paid, whether that needs to be reported, or interest paid pertaining to current year alone is to be filtered and to be reported. In my view, interest pertaining to current year is required to be reported, not interest paid during the year attributable or related to some other year, that is not required to be reported. Now, these are all queries relating to for tax audit report, which I thought very important to be discussed. Many more queries will take up after 5 minutes. These are all certain changes in 3CD which need to be factored by professionals for the current year. Quickly I'll rush through. Class 8 deals with classes under 44AB. Class 8A introduced with effect from 1st of October 2020 for a corporate assessee. 115 BA, BAA, BAB, interest BA introduced long back, but interest BAA and BAB introduced by last year ordinance endorsed by Finance Act 2020, where a company would like to take a lower rate of tax, 22%, 15%, it has to file form number 10 IC10 ID as the case may be. In that case, auditor has to say whether assessee has opted for taxation under 115 BA, BAA, BAB. Auditor has to say it's a new provision, we have to say. Then if that company so opts, then the brought forward depreciation, not all brought forward depreciation, brought forward depreciation attributable to the additional depreciation. Now the assessee has got brought forward depreciation. We go back to the respective year. In that year, he claimed additional depreciation on new plant and machinery. That much of additional depreciation attributable to acquisition of new plant and machinery remaining on the opening day in the unabsorbed depreciation will not be eligible to be carried forward. That much we will have to remove from unabsorbed depreciation, and we will have to add to the opening return down value and claim prospectively depreciation, not eligible for set off as unabsorbed depreciation. Those two adjustments we have to bring. Made return down value at the beginning of the year, and after that adjustment, how much is the return down value? So company is opting for 22%. That 15%, this is the first year, this question would not arise. So accelerated depreciation claimed in terms of 32(1)(2)(a), remaining unabsorbed as at the beginning of the year, we will have to pick it up. And the amount so added to the cost of the opening WDV, you can't claim as unabsorbed depreciation, but prospectively you can claim depreciation. Rule 60D talks about 40A3, cash payment made. If the payment is made on a holiday or a Sunday or a bank strike day, we used to always take a stand. That day we could not make payment because Rule 60D provides for exception in which class J says payment made in cash on a Sunday or a bank holiday or strike day eligible. Nothing wrong in it. This class J omitted with effect from 29th of January 2020. Any payment made on a bank holiday or a Sunday prior to 29th January 2020 exceeding 10,000 rupees will not get disallowance under 40A3. Any such payment made on or after 29th of January 2020, 40A3 will get invoked. Rule 60D would not help the assessee. Now, if the payment is so made and the assessee is able to demonstrate the other person has counted, I'll get permanent account number, letter from him. He has also considered the receipt. I am considering the payment. Genuineness proved. Can one take a stand? That 40A3 will not apply. Assessee can take a stand. As an auditor, we should not take the risk. We have to comment under para 3 of 3CA or para 3. I am aware of the fact that we have 3 judgments, Delhi, Punjab and Haryana or Rajasthan, to say as long as genuineness proved, purpose of 40A3 satisfied. Therefore, no disallowance. Equally, Madras High Court in the last month as well as last year went to the extent of saying that, sorry, will not allow this, because for a genuine transaction only we have to test 40A3. For a bogus transaction, why should we worry about 40A3? 37 itself will disallow it. You first prove it's a genuine transaction, then also satisfy 40A3. So therefore, genuineness alone always may not save the assay. We have judgments for and against, but to prove that the case should get out from the clutches of 48.3, it's ideal not only to say genuine, but also to say there are compelling reasons for assessee to make cash payment. Rather than genuine cases, if you are able to advance the case that there are compelling reasons for assessee, then it's all the more comfortable, strong case to argue that it is not disallowable under 48.3. But however, as tax auditor, we have to report under 48.3. We have to say para 3 and para 5 of 3CA, 3CB, as the case may be. Supposing the assessee makes cash payment in a foreign country, whether can we say 10,000 US dollar or 10,000 euro, 10,000 Great Britain pound, Australian dollar, or 10,000 INR divided by the ruling rate of that day for a conversion of the currency. Divide by that, we get 200 numbers of an euro. Whether the 200 only we should pay in cash? Very interesting question. September month last year, 2020 September, Honorable Mumbai Tribunal said, you can't take $10,000, 10,000 USD dollar, 10,000 Australian dollar, or 10,000 Great Britain pound on euro. You have to reduce the 10,000 rupees into currency factor and get the actual number. It will be paltry sum. That much only you can pay in cash. Suppose assessee goes for a foreign tour, participates in an exhibition, makes a cash payment in that exhibition hall, and he says $3,000 or $150 or $500. You apply the conversion rate, that number crosses 10,000. Officer disallowing this action, the action of the officer in disallowing this, upheld by the Bombay Tribunal. It's a very disturbing trend, but we have to factor it appropriately. 40, that of course, I think we are running out of time. These are all certain things. Again, 115BA cases brought forward loss. Again, similar to what we have seen in the depreciation table, same way this also we have to consider appropriately. Only aspect is non-furnishing of tax audit report may result in penalty, no problem. But make one thing very certain. Please note this. Section 44AB, class A, B, C, D, E also shall get the report before the specified date and furnish the report by that specified date. That means one has to obtain, an assessee has to obtain the report before the specified date. In one of the cases, on a last day of the tax audit report, the auditor signed the tax audit report, uploaded it. The assessee picked up the case and the officer picked up the case and said to the assessee, you have obtained the tax audit report on the specified date. The section does not say on or before the specified date. It says before the specified date. That means you should have obtained it at least one day before the specified date. You have obtained on the specified date, therefore I levy penalty. Matter traveled to tribunal. The tribunal came for the rescue of the assessee to say, even though section uses the language before the specified date, we will have to read it as on or before the specified date. So therefore, in that case, tribunal came for the rescue of the assessee and said no penalty is leviable. So if we use the last day meant for signing the tax audit report, uploading the tax audit report as the date, one disturbing officer may trouble the assessee by taking this plea. We have to again take up the case to tribunal and say the other tribunal judgments are in our favor. Therefore, let the report be completed at least one day prior to that last day. Uploading can take place on the last day, but reporting can be completed. So now what happens? In that return column, you will find two things: date of the report, date of uploading the report. I can say, as an assessee, I obtained the report on 30th of December, but my auditor communicated electronically that report to me on the 1st. That being the case, what happens? 30th is the date of the report. 31st is the date of uploading the report. We are complying with the law. So therefore, it's advisable to pick up the two difference so that unnecessarily the case will not get traveled to the tribunal and assessee will not land into difficulty. Something which we have to keep. Every year, this is an annual saga. All of us will continue to do this audit, and every time we try to educate ourselves by attending seminars, and several programs are conducted. your convener has picked up this particular topic and asked me to deliver this in a very short notice. The way in which he has quickly reacted when I was appearing for an appeal and Chennai by 11 o'clock or so, he has been following up very sincerely to put me in this particular pedestal with a shorter notice. His efforts are need to be necessarily applauded for knowledge dissemination, whatever efforts he has put in. Now, all that said and done, we are doing it, whether with COVID or without COVID, or all that. Let us make one thing very clear. We are doing it as professional. Assessees are always assessees. Professionals have to draw the Lakshman Rekha. Many occasions, our friends, brothers, sisters in profession go one step ahead, cross that Lakshman Rekha and invite trouble and not going to take care of themselves and families, etc. Therefore, in this season, we have seen number of cases where certain young professionals are able to cope up the pressure and landing themselves into trouble, also landing their family into trouble. Number of instances I can say, one small example alone I'll say. One auditor who has been visiting our office for various doubts, etc. On a particular day, morning, he asked his wife to get ready to go to a function. And that day, his neighbor auditor, another neighbor house, another chartered accountant, aged 65, his grandson's first birthday. So he wanted to visit there. His wife is getting ready. He was already ready. In the sofa, he was sitting. 8:20 morning. They have been invited for a breakfast. 8:25, he collapsed. Something went wrong and he was not able to breathe first. He was taken to hospital. The hospital declared he is no more. Now 9:30, his office staff picked up the office diary and started calling all the clients to say auditor is no more. One client replied, which is what we have to always bear in our mind. One client replied when he received this message from the staff of the auditor. Is it so? He said today he will give me ITRV after filing return. That is what the immediate reply of the SSC. How much ever we do, I'm not finding fault with all the SSCs, but at the same time, we have to remember that how much ever we do, SSCs would be SSCs. As professionals, we have to draw the Lakshman Rekha. And we have to see that beyond that we don't go, so that we can always preserve our health, preserve our relationship with family and friends, and also do justice with the profession. This is how we will have to take up our profession forward. Thank you one and all for your patient listening. Subject to the time available and the organizer's comfort, I'll take up the questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, it was a great deliberation, sir. And most importantly, the last words which you told, the practical part of life, that the life is means the life is much more beyond the profession actually. So family comes first and then the profession at the end of the day. Means it was a great deliberation. And as far as your question answers are concerned, means more or less all the question answers have been answered by you actually. The queries which are raised by the participants all have been answered by you more or less, sir. Sir, so before ending, sir, means I want to make a short announcement that tomorrow, for the benefits of the participants, we are having a joint seminar with WIRC of ICAI, and the topic is entrepreneurship opportunities in the securities market. And the speaker will be Mr. Vinayak Kinvinde. So as far as the registration details are concerned, all the details will be shared with you on the WhatsApp group right away. And so please do register in large numbers. And as far as sir, Ms. Sir is concerned, sir, it was a great deliberation. And sir, firstly, we are very much grateful to you that you have invested your time, you have shared your knowledge, and you have accepted our invitation at such a short notice. So, sir, we are very grateful to you. And as far as the topic is concerned, sir, you have explained each and every clause, each and every section which are related to tax audit in detail. And you also shared the recent developments also. So, sir, on behalf of Andheri Oshiwara Study Circle, I, Deepak Madlecha, Deputy Convener, sir, give you a hearty vote of thanks. And we look forward to hear from you in near future. And sir, and we look forward to meet you in person also whenever we visit Coimbatore, sir.
Equally,
So,
when I am getting a chance to fly to Mumbai after this COVID is over, we will personally all of us meet in one place so that the intimacy will get developed. We'll see
Yes,
that
yes,
we will get
100%,
over
sir.
as soon as possible so that we'll personally meet.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Do you want to add?
I have nothing to say
Amish,
further.
Amish,
Thank you, sir. Thanks for accepting the short notice period, and your follow-up was also good.
Oh,
And in the morning also you had given a lecture in New Delhi, and again in the evening again to our Andheri OC Recipe Study Circle. So we are very thankful to you, sir.
thank you for the opportunity.
We can close the meeting now. Sir, I